Hi guys, welcome to this University of Derby VFX Crew Real Flow Flooding a City video tutorial. This is actually about my third increment of this video tutorial. There's loads of steps involved in this. It's a complex task, and so bear with me. Every now and again I sort of skip a step, realised I've skipped a step, or I missed something or something doesn't quite work. Please be patient with me, because I refuse to re-record this video any more times. So I will just have to kind of redo it. So I apologise for that. What I do want to quickly show you is that on the module there is a study materials tab, and you want to sort of go ahead and open the study materials tab, go down to the Flood City Streets resources, and basically download all of this information. What we've got is a street model. It's basically a model of a city street block, and the textures come with that. I've also got like a little script, and the script basically will transfer the textures of a model. So if you've downloaded a different model of something else and you want to render it in, using RenderMan, then what this will do, this will strip out all the textures off the original materials, and it'll apply them automatically to a new set of materials that RenderMan can actually read and understand. So it's a massive time saver, especially for something like this city block that is built of loads of different shaders, maybe 20 or 30 shader textures in there. And then we've got a HDRI map that I've supplied. This is a video copilot texture map for the dome lighting, so HDRI environment lighting. We purchased the video copilot city pack, and that's what these buildings are from, and that's what this background's for. So we can use this for kind of educational purposes only. And then moving forward, if you want to take this kind of ocean scene setup further, I have done, I think you might have seen on the Facebook group, I did some rolling waves at one point. This is basically my cheat sheet for that. So when it comes to using the Ocean Forces daemon, you might want to look at my settings and kind of mimic these to get nice rolling waves. So just to quickly show you kind of what we're not going to be doing. No, but what we are going to be trying to achieve is something like along these kind of lines, but at a much kind of smaller scale. I don't know if you guys have seen the film The Day After Tomorrow. It's got a sort of couple of epic scenes in it, flood scenes, which I really kind of like. So this is kind of what we're going to be mimicking. I'll just play this through a little bit. Excuse me. So it kind of starts with this huge tsunami. It's on a massive scale, and what you need to appreciate is this is done on a number of computers, probably across a period of weeks and months even, to get this simulation how they wanted it. It's very, it's on a huge scale. So what we're going to do is, clearly it's not going to be of this kind of degree, but there's no reason why you couldn't start a project like this kind of now and have it finished in a few weeks' time for one of these scenes. So like this scene in particular is what I really like. We've got some foam, we've got some fluids coming through the city. Obviously we've got cars and stuff and people fleeing. We won't be doing all that stuff, but we've got some buildings, and the buildings could be rendered not so indifferently from this if you were to spend some time doing it. So and you could adapt what I'm going to show you today quite easily to create this kind of scene here. If you go and film something and track it in Synthesize, you could quite easily use what I show you today to create this kind of massive, huge flood city kind of flood thing. So yeah, this is what we're doing. Obviously I haven't got the rights to be shown this video publicly, so again this is just for us to be looking at quickly as reference. The Day After Tomorrow, tsunami, so let's do something like that. Okay, so without another further ado, I'll let you guys just download all the files that you kind of need, and when you have, then you can sort of move on from this point forward. So to start off with, let's just get straight into Maya, and let's make sure that we've opened the project window, you've set your folder, you've got your folder selected correctly, so everything will kind of save in there from this scene. Something I'm going to do as well, or just show you what I've done. this little running man in the background here. Make sure that playback speed is set to play every frame. And your maximum playback speed is your scene settings is set to real time rather than free. Quite often it's at free. Let's cancel the save this even. And then something else obviously I want to do is just go into my settings and preferences. So I've got some music on in the background. Let me just turn that down. If I go to my preferences and I go to my settings, I just want to change this to PAL 25 frames a second. And I want to save that. And then my kind of keyframes go a bit funky, so let's just clean them up again. So I just want it to 200. It's just because it's retimed it basically. And you know, just double check this. Yeah, real time, 25 frames, play every frame. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Something else that I have noticed, sometimes my RealFlow tab doesn't appear properly. That is just a matter of, sometimes you have to go in to this little cog here, delete the shelf, and then go back to your settings and preferences, plugin manager, and just toggle on this kind of RealFlow bundle a couple of times, refresh it, close it. Sometimes you have to shut down Maya, start it back up again. Can be a little bit frustrating, but you know, just in case that happens, I'm just kind of letting you know that that happens to me too. Okay, we're good to start, we're good to go. Things are working, things are good. I've got my RenderMan tabs loaded, RealFlow's loaded. So I want to create my geometry for my building, my buildings, my city street. So I'm going to file, import, I'm going to navigate to City Street Layout 01, so wherever you've downloaded it to, that's what you want. Import, kind of reads the file, attaches things, creates the textures, puts the textures together, and we end up with this lovely city street block. Like I said, we have got the Video Copilot buildings, and it comes with a whole series of city streets, individual buildings and whatnot. I did send you the link. It is on the link is on the PowerPoint presentations. I think I shared it at the beginning of this module. So if you want to use a different city street, you might want to look to see what's available to you there. Or if you come back and do a different tutorial, you might want to look at that, and you'll find some of the buildings in there. But it's the same principle, but you can use this one for now. And something else to point out, and I mention this when we get back into RealFlow, is if I just go wireframe, you can see my kind of default Maya grid is kind of this size, but the building's kind of huge like this, so we will end up scaling this down in RealFlow just so that we can work with a more speedier, more efficient simulation setup. And also talking about optimizing, so what we want to do, I want to come in here, we want to select all my buildings. If I just go wireframe, you can see it a bit clearer. And what we're going to do is we're going to merge these together, and just my buildings only. We're going to merge these together, and we can create a collision piece of geometry for RealFlow, so the particles can kind of flood in from one side, hit the buildings, but won't have to worry about things like which are too far and too small and too many points to bother with, like these street signs and these antennas and kind of roof decal that you can kind of see. You know, we want to give RealFlow the best chance to have an optimized kind of performance, so we don't need all that extra stuff, but we do need the buildings. So I'm just going to select all of those, and then I'm going to go to under the modeling tab, I'm going to go to mesh and combine, and that basically gives me one piece of geometry here that I can now export out as an SD and bring into RealFlow, and so RealFlow won't have to worry about all this other extra stuff. So just on your RealFlow tab, go to your SD export settings here. Make sure you've got export selected, checked. Navigate to your working project folder. For me, I've already kind of got a RealFlow folder that's set up, and a city collision geometry, but I'll export it again just to kind of show you I'm doing it as well. Don't worry about the cameras, but it'll bring a camera in anyway. Playback range, don't even really need a playback range, but I'm going to have that just so that when I bring it in, hopefully RealFlow will also be on 200 frames. So that's it for this scene, for this Maya thing. So because this scene's only going to be used for creating this collisions object, I'm going to save it in case we do end up coming back to it, needing to come back to it. Ultimately, we're kind of done with Maya for this second, and now we can go into RealFlow and bring in our piece of geometry. So I've got, it's probably worth me pointing out, I've got RealFlow 10. You guys are probably using RealFlow 2015. This RealFlow 10, it's just a demo, like everything in my life is just a demo. So you all kind of know about setting projects and whatnot. If you don't, you should have, because we've done this like 2 or 3 times now previously. But for those of you who forget because you're a bit slow, it will look a little bit like this, and then this will do this. It might even crash because it, you know, wants to be funky with me. But you'll get this little project management, you know, window will pop up, and here you just kind of tell it where you want it to go, blah de blah, and then you give it a name, and then you create a new project, and that will be that. I'm not using this version, I'm using this version, which is going to be pretty much the same. The layout's pretty much the same, everything's kind of the same, it's just got a few extra things in there. Okay, beautiful. So let's start off with, I've got my project all set and everything. Something that you might want to do that you won't have done, that you will want to do, is just click this little arrow down here and go to your options and make sure that this frames per second is set to 25 as well. So your Maya scene is set to 25 and your RealFlow scene is also set to 25. That's quite important. And then let's go to the geometry tab. Let's import. Let's go and find our RealFlow fluid. Where did I put it? Wherever I put it. Let me go to my desktop so I can see. New city fluid. There we go. RealFlow city collision. That's my piece of geometry. Comes in, looks kind of like this, fantastic, it's exactly what we expect to see, you know, matches up exactly with what we've got in this scene, so it's a beautiful thing. And the nice thing about combining the geometry as well is you just end up with one piece of geometry for it to deal with. If you haven't combined it, you may run into trouble a little bit later on down the line when you come to do your simulation and whatnot, and you're scaling your scenes and your geometry and stuff, so please do combine it. I didn't combine it on one of my previous kind of trials, and as soon as I pressed simulate, the buildings just flew apart and it all came a bit horrible, so please do combine. You don't need the camera, so you can blow that away, unless you've already got a pre-animated camera, which is kind of nice to have your camera, but we haven't got there yet. So this is my piece of geometry. Again, talking about scene scale, if you see like my RealFlow grid, I have mentioned this to some of you guys individually, but if you look at my RealFlow grid, it's quite small compared to my buildings. And if I just get a standard particle emitter, you don't need to do this, but this is for demonstration purposes only. If I create a standard emitter, if we kind of look at the size of that, it's minute. And I always use this as kind of a point of reference. So everything that I do in RealFlow is basically based around this kind of scale, because I know this is what RealFlow creates by default. It's what it's comfortable with working with, and it's kind of its optimal kind of scene scale size. So what I like to do is scale down my geometry to kind of match this kind of size, so that I know that things will run as quickly as possible, or as fluently as possible, because scene scale makes a big difference when it comes to particles and simulations, as it does with lighting and rendering in RenderMan. So let's scale down our geometry, our scene geometry. So we can blow this away, or I'm going to blow this away because I don't actually need it. I'm going to come down to this little box here, and geometry scale. You see, because I've done this already, it's already at 0.05, which is kind of what I want it to be. But, okay, so this is my bad. I'm not starting again. I'm going to change this to 1. And I'm going to blow that building away. Because I want to scale it after I bought the geometry in, basically. So, import it, city collision. Yeah, there you go. So, now I can scale the scene down to 0.5, which is what you guys can do. Boom. And it comes down to kind of small like this. And again, I can just blow away my camera. So I'm just going to quickly run through some things, some sort of navigation things in RealFlow. Like I said, I know most of you guys have used this before, but for like, you know, the one or two of you that maybe just need a quick refresher. Navigating around the viewport, my navigation settings are set to be the same as kind of Maya. So I press Alt, I right click and I can zoom in and out, I middle click and I can kind of pan, and I left click and I rotate around. If I've got a piece of geometry selected here, I can toggle between bounding box, wireframe. This is shaded and this is smooth shaded, basically, which you see more when you basically create RealFlow meshes of actual fluids. You see the difference between kind of the smooth shaded and shaded. Also, if I want to, let's say my piece of geometry ends up over here somewhere and I'm kind of navigating around and I feel that it's a bit lost. In the top corner here, you'll see it says Persp. That's your perspective view. If you right click on that, you get these little sub controls. One is zoom all, one is zoom selected, one is center selected. So you can kind of you know, use those to recenter your scene when you get a little bit lost in the navigation. It does happen, and it will happen, and it can happen, and it should happen, and it shouldn't happen. Okay, I'm getting a bit carried away, going a bit loony. And then also, finally, if you want to have, if you want to hide just one single piece of geometry, you can click this little cube in the center of the this menu here. This will hide it and unhide it. Makes no difference on the simulation. It will still be simulated whether it's hidden or unhidden, so don't worry about that. And if you want overall, if you want to change your viewports overall, number 1 will give you a top view, number 2 will give you a side view, as will number 3 give you the other side view. One's front actually and one's side. And then 4 is back to your perspective view. And if you want to change the scene shading, then overall rather than just per object, because this is per object, then it is 7 for bounding box, 8 for wireframe, 9 for shaded, and 0 for smooth shaded. So you know, you might want to just pause the video, go back and listen to what I've just said and write that down. Please do take notes, man. You're never going to really remember anything if you just, especially with this one. This is a long one, guys. I mean, you need to go and get some popcorn, fizzy drinks, coffee, some snacks, some fish and chips, whatever it is you need, man, to get through this. This is a long tutorial. We go through so many different steps. Like I said, I've done this tutorial, you know, I'm making this my own tutorial, but I'm still doing it 3 times because I keep doing little silly things wrong. So please write stuff down, man. Don't think that you can come back to this in 2 weeks and you're going to remember it, because you're not, are you? Let's face it. But anyway, so cool, boom. We've got our collision objects in the scene and we've scaled down our geometry so it's a more manageable kind of scene scale size. Let's go ahead and save. It's probably a good idea, right? I've already renamed mine, so Flooded City 01. Okay, so now let's get into actually creating our fluid, and we want to use this Hybrido tab. They come up with all these funky names. I've got no idea why or what it actually really means. It's probably something to do with fluid, but this tab here basically has got a whole bunch of objects that you can use for creating ocean scenes, but out of particles. There's a whole nother tab here, Real Wave. This will create like a piece of geometry, a flat piece of geometry that will do like a big open surface. But Hybrido will create the particles that can interact and do stuff with this, what we want to do. So this is the menu that we're going to work with today. You guys have generally worked with the standard particles, so we're moving forward to Hybrido. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly click this little block box here, close domain. When I click it, it gives me some settings. By default, I'm just going to leave the settings as they are, except this, I want the top to be open. And it's a couple of reasons. One reason is I don't want the particles to kind of have a roof limit. If there's a massive splash and it goes, I want it to be able to go out the top of the buildings, and I want it, but it's not going to, but I just, you know, in general, I like to have the top open. But also it just means that when I press OK, you'll see 2 pieces of geometry. One will be this HY closed domain container, and you can see that's the one with the open top. And basically all particles that are generated generally will collide with the inside of this box, and so will mostly not escape. And then we've got HY closed domain water, and that's kind of like your emitter container. So initially from frame 1, sorry, your particles will actually be, if I just hide this, they'll be created in here initially. We'll use this, we'll manipulate this, we'll move it around in the scene so it kind of sits over here. But like I said, the reason I like to click the open top one is so I can see the difference between these two. Because essentially, if you have it as a closed top, it just becomes another cube and ends up looking exactly the same as that one down there. So it just gets confusing. Personal preference. Anyway, so let's just deal with this one first. HY closed domain container. So I basically want this to, I'm just going to go to my side view. I just press 2 for that. I'm going to switch this to kind of a wireframe view so I can kind of move it. This music's actually doing my head in the background now. Some screamy shy dude. Let's go and put some Maxwell on. So this is some reggae and it's just like, boy, it's doing my head in, so it's probably doing your head in even more. But I need it to keep me awake. Okay, sorry, back to what we're doing. HY domain container. I've got it selected there. I just want to move it up. Can kind of see a little bit of the screen line here. Maybe this at the bottom I could do just hiding that for a sec as well, so I can clearly just work on this for starters. So this is my container. Like I said, particles will basically collide with the interior of this container. I'll just go back to 4. So they'll all sit with inside this. Back to 2. And I just generally put it a little bit below the surface. So I don't mind if my fluid sits underneath the ground plane. That's totally fine by me. It'll give me a sharper edge. But sometimes I find when I do a simulation, there's a little bit of an offset between where the particles will collide and this container. So sometimes I kind of drop it down. You can change this at any point, so just get the level that you want. But for now, just sort of roughing it out. I'm just going to put it down there, but I also do want to scale it. And I think I'm going to have my fluid come in from this side. So I kind of want to scale this a little bit this way. Move it over a bit. I'm also just going to move this domain up as well. And I'll talk to you about that in a few minutes. So at first we're just messing around with the domain container or collider. So something a bit like that is kind of what you want to be going for. Now we will start looking at this closed domain water. So I just want to make that visible again by tapping that little cube. And like I said, this is what's going to initially sort of generate my fluid. Or my fluid's going to be generated within this. So I want something like this. Doesn't need to be that huge. So I'm just kind of scale it roughly like this. Don't worry if yours doesn't match mine exactly. You don't need all the figures. You're kind of doing your own thing, but it's gonna want to be kind of similar to this. So my particles will be generated inside this cube. Again, I'm going to turn that into a bounding box or wireframe. And now I'm going to talk to you about this domain, HY closed domain. Basically, this kind of shows you what the resolution of your fluid or the density of what your fluid is going to be when it's generated inside this emitter kind of shape here. And at the moment, if you look at these cubes that are sat on the corners, they're kind of a mid-size. And if I just quickly do a simulate, I'm going to tap this on and off. Okay, you kind of have this number of particles in your scene at the moment. And this is kind of low res, you know, for like what we really want. This is going to be packed thick. It's going to be packed full of particles. So you can change basically what the resolution of these particles is by playing around with this domain. And we're looking particularly for cell size. Cell size basically tells, which is connected to this HY domain, basically tells RealFlow how high to make the resolution of these particles. And the higher the resolution, the smaller this cell size, the higher the resolution. And the smaller this cell size, the higher the resolution, the slower the simulation will be in general. So to get, you know, to do a test, we might have something a bit like this, which is kind of low res. It'll give us a general idea of whether things are working, whether particles are escaping, whether they're colliding, all this, that, and the other. But when it comes down to it, and we really want to get you know, a higher resolution of particles, we need to reduce this cell size. And as you can see, these squares have got smaller because they're kind of showing that things are going to be more compact. If I do reset and quickly tap on and off simulate, now you can see way more particles, right? And we might even get more particles than this when we come to do our final simulation. But yeah, just keep in mind that the more particles you have in here, the slower this simulation is going to be. So for now, I'm going to stick with 0.3. Tap it on and off. Yeah, that seems like a, you know, it's a low enough resolution, and we won't have too much of a hiccup with our first sort of test simulations. Okay, so this is all good. Something else that I need to do is particles can escape this container. You know, without going into too much detail, there's a thing kind of called substeps. Substeps is basically how many times the collision of a particle is calculated per frame. So if it's only if a particle is only calculated once per frame, and it happens to move, let's say from this square to this square within that one frame, and it's only calculated once, then what can happen is the particle can quite easily escape through the side of the container. If it's calculated 30 times, then as the frame is moving forward, it will be calculated here, 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 and at which point within that 30 odd times, it may find that it's hit this container wall, and so it will be kept inside. So the higher your substeps, basically, the more precise your simulation is going to be, and the less likely particles are going to escape. However, what we can do is we can kind of guarantee that they won't. And to do this, we use one of these daemons called a kill volume, and basically what that creates is this little cube, which you can kind of see down here at the base, which I'm going to fit to this object in a minute. But basically the theory behind it is anything that exists outside of this cube will be deleted. Anything particle wise, sorry, will be deleted. So it doesn't matter whether it's hit a wall or not, it will just get deleted. And it's important to kind of use this within your scenes, because if you don't, what happens is as particles move further and further away from the center structure and center object, the calculations become more difficult for real flow. So it can slow down. If a particle suddenly shoots out from here to over here, it can massively slow down your simulation time. So you definitely want to make sure you've got a kill volume in the scene. And what we can do is we can just quickly fit it to an object. So we want to fit it to our container. Boom, done. So it's just basically, it exists now just slightly outside the container. And like I said, anything that, any particle that escapes this will be deleted theoretically. So this is probably a good time for me to start talking about this relationship editor. Because as you can see, some of these nodes are connected to the hub. Some of these nodes are just sitting in space, and some of them are not connected to anything. This can get a little bit complicated, but basically one of the clever things that RealFlow does is if something can be connected, see this little hand here, when it's over these pictures, when it's over the pictures of these things, again I'm just navigating the same as I do in Maya, so I'm pressing Alt, middle mouse button to kind of pan, and actually just rolling my mouse wheel to zoom in and out. But if I click over one of these pictures and I click on it with my left mouse button, things become greyed out, and the things that become greyed out are what you can't connect to it, and things that are, you know, coloured, you can connect it, and you basically just drag and drop over the top, and it connects. This is already connected, so that's going to make a difference. But kind of bear with me. What we want then is to make sure that this kill volume here is actually linked in some way to these particles. So although we have these hubs, This is generally if you've got more than one complicated simulation going on in the scene. I like to ignore that hub for this particular kind of scene, but I won't delete it. But what I do is I just make sure that things are connected as I need to. So if I click on this kill volume, and I want this kill volume to definitely kill the particles, I need to make sure it's connected to it. So get my little hand over the little picture, the red picture, left click, and I can see that the only thing that's lit up is HY closed domain. So I just drag this little stringy thing over to the picture on the HY domain. That's basically the particles in my scene, and that makes sure that this is linked to that, and that this thing will kill all the particles that come flying outside of this thing. So it's as simple as that, really. So these ones that are not connected, they are not meant to be connected. They don't need to be connected. One thing that does need to be connected is the buildings. Again, I want my particles to be connected to the buildings, or I want them to collide with the buildings, and acknowledge that the buildings exist. So I'm going to get my buildings, and I'm also going to connect that to my domain. So now my kill volume is connected to the domain, and also my buildings are connected to the domain. You can go in there and basically link things up through this hub. And basically what you kind of are saying is if it's connected to the hub, then it's all interacting with each other. But like I said, I like to just directly link this bad boy over. So buildings connected to my domain, and my kill volume is also connected to my domain. And this is also probably a good time for me to add gravity, because without gravity, physically the fluids could just float up into the air and go to the moon if they wanted. So again, on your Demons tab, hit your gravity button, and we can see again it's not connected to the domain, so we need to grab the little icon picture, pull it over to closed domain, and we have everything that's supposed to be linked up is linked up nicely. The last thing to make sure is that I was going to say that the kill volume and the buildings and the gravity are kind of all nicely kind of lined up, because it can get kind of messy in here. So I know I've just subtly been doing this as we've been going along, but I've not actually said to do it. I would just kind of organize this relationship editor graph view in a way that kind of makes sense to you. So mine kind of looks like that. Okay, so we're pretty much ready to simulate. The only thing that we're missing out on is, by default, what you'll find is when you press simulate, if I press simulate now, I've got some particles, one set of particles, they've kind of dropped to the floor because we've got gravity, but it's just not very many of them. And the way to kind of solve this, is I basically want a bunch of particles to continually be dropping down and splashing down here. So reset this, press yes. I go to my domain emitter, and under the emitter tab here, there's a little checkbox that says stream. So I need to check that on. And what that'll do, if I press simulate now, is that'll just continue to emit particles from this box here. So this is pretty good. I know you're all kind of like, yeah, when we're going to get to this part, so we're kind of here now. As you can see, this simulation is running pretty quickly, and part of that is because we have scaled our geometry down in our scene, and also because we have just very few particles going on in the scene at the moment. But it's doing exactly what I wanted it to be doing. The particles are flooding in from this side like our little tidal wave, and they're coming through the city streets here. You can kind of see it, if we zoom in a bit closer, it's moving around the buildings. And it's a beautiful thing, right? So that's kind of cool. I'm just going to stop the simulation there. Something that if I sort of scroll here, something that does happen, the fluids come down. Now this is a city street, so there's going to be friction between the fluid and the ground. And something that we haven't done is set up any kind of friction. So, this is one thing that you do find in really kind of poor simulations. People don't set any kind of friction, and it just kind of, the fluid just kind of spreads out and floats across the floor like mercury, which is not what we want. And also, actually, it's probably a good time to kind of look at, you know, I said that there's a collision distance. Here we go. If you look, this is my HY closed domain container, this green thing here, which I moved slightly below the ground. And there's a distance between where the particles are actually interacting with that. There's a little bit of a gap here. And so we can kind of see here that those particles aren't actually sat flush on the floor. You know, they should be going around exactly around the bottom of these buildings. So this is a good time for me, while we're on a low resolution, to select both. I'm going to select both my kill volume and my container. I'm just actually going to shunt them down a little bit more. The reason I'm selecting both is because if I didn't and I just selected the container, I would only be moving the container, and that would offset where the particles are deleted. So I want to just make sure I keep an eye on that. And like I said, I'm just going to estimate. So, you know, there's this kind of distance here, so I'm going to move these down that same kind of distance again. I'm going to reset. I'm going to come back to talking about the friction momentarily, but I just kind of wanted to show you. So now they're sliding closer to the base of the building, but maybe even still a bit more. So again, let's just move both the container and the thing down a fraction more. Reset. Simulate. There you go. So I've moved it down just enough to allow for that offset that happens, and so now my fluids are definitely going to be going across the ground plane, across the floor in my scene. So stop that, reset. Number 4, back to perspective, and I'm going to just save. And now I need to talk about the friction. So instead of having the particles just kind of shoot across the bottom of the floor, again, this is all within the container. I basically want to find, I want to go to my object, HY closed domain container, object submenu, and I want to come down to grid friction here. And I'm not going to worry about all the rest of this, but if I just pop this up to 0.25, let's just run that sim. So there we go, already I can kind of see it's having an effect. So rather than them just very quickly shooting out and spreading out, you know, the fluid is kind of hitting the ground and actually having some form of interaction with the ground. And you know, if I just push that up to 0.5, in fact, let me just put it up to 1 and so you can see it much clearer. Reset, yes. Probably hit the ground and kind of, there you go. It's bounced a little bit there. But now, you know, the fluid that's touching the ground, that's kind of staying down here. And then actually some of the fluid is running over the top of it, because that's, you know, it's just a good way to kind of slow things down and make sure you don't get like crazy particles flying off. Which is kind of what we want. So I'm going to stop that, reset, yes. Something else that I do want is a lot more kind of splash. So I might just have a look at a few settings to add some extra kind of bounce off these objects here. But we are going to use, in the hybrido, we are going to use this little icon here, which is splash and foam. And this will automatically generate extra particles, but separate particle emitter. Where our main fluid hits an object, hits the ground, hits something and creates splash. This will add extra like foamy splashes to that area. So we're gonna come back to that in a minute. All I want to do is I just want to refine. I don't want my grid friction to be 1. I do want it to be less than that. So I'm going to go 50-50. I'm going to put it on a 0.5. Let's just have a look at this. So now I'm at the kind of stage, you know, I'm kind of refining things. So I might just have a look at this piece of geometry here, the buildings. I might just let's have a look at here again. We've got some grid friction, so I might add like a 0.25 to that, so that the fluid doesn't just, you know, float over it straight away. Display export. Oh yeah, something else I'll show you just as a demonstration. I'm just going to create a cube. I'm just going to move that here. Look how small that cube is. You see how it's a good job that we scaled things. I'm just going to scale it up. I'm just going to move it here. I'm going to reset. Yes. Keep active. I'm going to just turn on dynamic active rigid body. Oh, sorry, been a bit backwards there. What I'm going to show you is I need to, you know, I haven't got it connected to anything, have I? Look, silly me. So I need to link it to my fluid, and I also need to link it to my container because I don't want it to just go through the floor. So simulation. That's still going through. Ah yes, sorry, now that's me still being backwards. My container, I need to make a passive rigid body. Get there in a second. There's probably one more checkbox I need to hit as well. Clearly. Oh yeah, of course, silly me. Under closed domain container, under the object, we want to go to rigid bodies, and we just want to change this. By default, it's set to outside. And this is just the collision of the geometry. So I want to make sure this is set to inside because I want it to collide with the inside of the object, obviously, not the outside. So if I simulate this, hopefully now, this cube should hit the bottom of the ground here, but not only hit the bottom of the ground, please. Yes, there we go. Thank you, God. But also, we can mess around with its settings just enough that now it's being hit by the fluid as well. So for those who want to, who may want to include, you know, vehicles in your fluid sim, obviously we'd need to look at the collision distance because it's far too far away. Reset this, yeah. But what we can do is, and I might just drop this to the ground already, like that. So yeah, this obviously the collision distance between the geometry and the other geometry is quite low, but the distance between the particles and the geometry is quite high. So it's probably quite important to make sure that the collision distance between the particles matches what the geometry is doing. But yeah, I just wanted to show you this anyway, quickly, for those who are like, yeah, I want to have cars splashing through my thing. You can do it. You just have to play around with the rigid body settings of the geometry. You need to make sure that your collision object is set to collision inside if you want it to collide inside the box. And it's just a matter of changing, where is it, dynamics to passive rigid body for the collision object and active rigid body for our actual piece of geometry that's going to be floating around the scene. And you can also go into there as well. When we've got this object set up, we can look at our cell size, we can look at friction, interaction, and then I think one of the important things is the mass as well. So we can change the mass of the object to make it heavier or lighter, and obviously in doing so, you'll be able to see how it interacts with the fluid itself differently. The heavier it is, the more fluid will kind of go around it, and the less it will kind of move through, the more it will sink to the bottom of the fluid, and all these extra things. But we're not covering that in this tutorial, but I just wanted to show you that very quickly as a possibility. Again, in your own future studies, you might want to look into adding vehicles or other things that kind of get swept around by the fluid. So that's how you would do that. Okay, so let's get back on track, Jay. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to turn this off so it's no longer a rigid body. No, so that isn't being calculated. So we can get back to our reasonably quick simulation look. Because obviously that's the other thing. If you start to add rigid body calculations to it, it slows everything down. So this isn't too bad. Kind of doing what I want it to be doing. We've got gravity and we've got all our other things. So the only other thing is now I wanted to introduce 2 more aspects, and then we're kind of done for simulation. And that is, I want to look at this ocean force daemon, basically deformer, and I also want to add foam and spray. So this is probably a good time to have a quick break. I'm going to save this project here. I'm going to finish this video at this point just to force you guys to have a break, because you know we've covered a lot already, and when we come back we will move on to adding the ocean force deformer and adding some foam and particles as well.